The Veloran warriors stood in perfect formation, their crystalline scales catching the harsh light of their planet's twin suns. They had fought for 300 years against the Kreth Empire, and they had lost every major battle. Their generals had studied ancient tactics. Their soldiers trained from birth. Their weapons were advanced beyond measure, yet they continued to fall. Commander Zethal looked at the holographic display showing their shrinking territory. Another fortress had fallen. Another army had been destroyed. The Kreth were not stronger or faster. Their technology was nearly equal, but somehow the enemy always won. "We need help," the High Council finally admitted in their emergency session. That was when they sent the message to Earth. The humans had only been part of the galactic community for 50 years. They were young. They were small. Their ships were slow by galactic standards. Most species considered them barely worth noticing. But there were rumors. Strange rumors about their military history, stories of impossible victories against superior forces, tales of soldiers who refused to surrender even when all logic said they should. The Velarans were desperate enough to listen to rumors. 6 weeks later, a single human transport ship arrived in orbit around Velora Prime. It carried no weapons, no army, just 12 humans in simple gray uniforms. Their leader was a woman named Colonel Sarah Chen. She was small by human standards, barely reaching the chest of the average Veloran warrior. Her hair was streaked with gray. Her face showed lines of age and experience. Zethal met her at the landing platform, surrounded by his honor guard of the finest Veloran fighters. Each of them towered over the humans. Each could lift 5 times their body weight. Each had been bred for war across countless generations. "You are our salvation," Zethal asked, not hiding his disappointment. Colonel Chen looked up at him without any sign of fear or intimidation. "I am your teacher," she said simply. "Whether you become your own salvation depends on you." The council gave her 1 regiment to prove herself. 5,000 Veloran warriors, considered expendable after their recent defeats. They were stationed at a remote training facility on Velora's largest moon. The other human advisors were each assigned to different units across the planet. The first day of training, the warriors expected lectures on new weapons or advanced technology. Instead, Colonel Chen made them run. "Run," Sergeant Kether repeated, confused. "We are not runners, we are warriors." "You are tired warriors who cannot march for more than 6 hours without rest," Chen replied. "The Kreth march for 12. Run." They ran. The Velorans were strong, but they had never trained for endurance. Within an hour, half the regiment had collapsed. Chen had them carry their fallen comrades and keep moving. "This is madness," Kether gasped after 3 hours. "What does running teach us about winning battles?" Chen stopped beside him. She was not even breathing hard, despite having run the entire distance with them. "The Kreth beat you because they can choose when to fight. They attack when you are tired, when you are far from supply lines, when you are spread thin. If you can outlast them, you take that choice away. Now run." The training continued for weeks. They ran, they climbed, they crawled through mud and ice. They learned to sleep in 4-hour shifts and remain alert. They practiced carrying wounded soldiers across impossible terrain. The warriors complained constantly. Many asked to transfer. Some tried to sabotage the training. Chen never raised her voice. She simply continued, adjusting the training for those who struggled, pushing harder those who excelled. She learned every soldier's name. She learned their families, their fears, their dreams. When a young warrior named Vethia broke down crying from exhaustion, Chen sat with her for an hour, talking quietly about courage and persistence. "Why do you care about us?" Vethia asked. "We are nothing to your people. We cannot even pay you properly." Chen smiled, a strange expression that the Velorans were slowly learning to read. "I care because you want to survive. You want to protect your homes and families. That makes you worth caring about." After 8 weeks, Chen finally began teaching them about combat. But it was not the combat they expected. The Kreth use standard formation attacks, she explained, showing holographic displays of past battles. 42 recorded patterns with minor variations. You have been trying to counter each pattern individually. This is wrong. But our tactical computers analyze each pattern and recommend countermeasures, Zethal protested. He had begun visiting the training facility, curious about the changes he was seeing in his soldiers. Your tactical computers are excellent at pattern recognition, so are the Kreth computers. You are fighting computer against computer. This means the side with more soldiers always wins. Chen pointed at the display. But here, and here, your commanders made decisions that the Kreth did not expect. Each time you won the engagement. Why? The room was silent. Because they did not follow the computer, Kether said slowly. They acted on instinct. They acted on human instinct, Chen corrected. Or rather, the instincts that humans have refined over thousands of years of warfare. We call it tactical creativity. The ability to see opportunities that no pattern predicts. The willingness to take risks that no computer would recommend. The understanding that war is not mathematics. She began teaching them differently. Instead of drills and formations, she presented problems. Complex scenarios where there was no correct answer. She made them argue with each other, defend their ideas, challenge their assumptions. She taught them to question everything, including orders from superior officers. This is dangerous thinking, Zethal warned her privately. You are teaching them to disobey. I am teaching them to think, Chen replied. An army that cannot adapt is already dead. It just does not know it yet. 3 months into the training, the Kreth attacked the moon facility. It was supposed to be a training base, far from the front lines. No one expected an assault there. The base had minimal defenses, designed only to repel pirates and raiders. 2,000 Kreth soldiers landed in drop pods, supported by artillery from 3 orbiting warships. The traditional response would have been to retreat. The 5,000 Velorans were trainees, not battle-ready soldiers. They had limited ammunition and no heavy weapons. Logic said to evacuate and preserve forces for future battles. Kether looked at Colonel Chen. What do we do? Chen smiled that strange human smile again. What do you think we should do? Kether thought about everything he had learned. The endless runs through hostile terrain, the creative problem-solving, the lessons about taking away the enemy's choices. They expect us to run, he said slowly. They want us to run. Their ships are positioned to intercept evacuation transports. Yes, Chen agreed, so we do not run. Kether turned to his soldiers. We fight, but not their way. We use the terrain we have trained on for 3 months, terrain they do not know. We hit them from directions they do not expect. We make them fight our battle, not theirs. The Battle of Velora Moon lasted 18 hours. The Kreth expected to overwhelm a retreating, demoralized enemy. Instead, they found themselves ambushed in canyons they had not scouted. They were attacked by soldiers who appeared from underground tunnels they did not know existed. They faced warriors who fought for 16 hours without rest, who carried wounded comrades while still firing weapons, who refused to surrender even when surrounded. When the Kreth finally retreated, they had lost 1,500 soldiers. The Velorans had lost 300. It was the first major Veloran victory in 40 years. News of the battle spread across the planet like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about the human training methods. The High Council demanded that all armies adopt Chen's approach. Requests came from every unit for human advisors. But Chen knew this was only the beginning. One battle did not win a war. The Kreth would adapt. They would learn. The Velorans needed to change not just their tactics but their entire understanding of warfare. She looked at Kether, who had been promoted to lead the expanded training program. Are you ready to teach others what you have learned? Kether straightened to his full height, nearly twice Chen's. I am ready to try. Good, Chen said. because trying is where all great things begin. The war for Velora's survival was about to enter a new phase. The victory at Velora Moon changed everything, but not in the ways the High Council expected. They wanted to copy Chen's methods exactly, applying them to every army immediately. Chen refused. Each unit is different, she explained to the frustrated counselors. Each commander has different strengths. Each group of soldiers comes from different regions with different cultures. You cannot simply copy what worked for one regiment and expect the same results. Counselor Methal, the eldest member of the governing body, leaned forward. Then what do you propose? Let my advisors work with each unit individually. Let us find what makes them strong and build on that. Give us 1 year. We may not have a year, another counselor argued. The Kreth are massing forces for a major offensive. Chen nodded. Then we will do what we can with the time we have. She sent her 11 advisors to different armies across Velora. Each human faced the same initial resistance that Chen had encountered. The Velorans were proud warriors with ancient traditions. They did not want to be taught by aliens who came from a young, insignificant species. Major David Okonkwo was assigned to the mountain warriors of the northern reaches. These Velorans were larger and stronger than their southern cousins, adapted to the thin air and freezing temperatures of the high peaks. Their commander, General Thexal, had never lost a defensive battle in 30 years of service. We do not need human tricks, Thexal told Okonkwo on the first day. We know how to defend our mountains. Okonkwo did not argue. Instead, he asked to observe their training. For 2 weeks, he watched and took notes. He asked questions about their traditions, their legends, their fears. He learned about the ancient warrior kings who had held these mountains against countless invasions. He heard stories of heroes who had sacrificed themselves to protect their homes. Then he made a simple observation. You fight to hold position, he said to Thexal, but your legends speak of warriors who attacked downhill, using the mountain itself as a weapon. When did your people stop fighting that way? Thexal was silent for a long moment. When the Kreth brought weapons that could destroy entire mountainsides, we learned to hide in deep bunkers instead. And the Kreth learned to wait you out, Okonkwo said. They surround your mountains, cut off supplies, and starve you into surrender. Your strength became your prison. The general's crystalline scales shifted color, a sign of deep thought among Velorans. What would you suggest? Teach your warriors to move. Not just defend, but attack and retreat. Use the mountains the way your ancestors did, as a maze that only you understand. Make the Kreth chase shadows while you strike at their supply lines. The training began the next day. On the other side of the planet, Lieutenant Jessica Torres worked with the naval forces of the Western Seas. Velorans were not natural sailors. Their crystalline scales made them denser than water, requiring special equipment to stay afloat. But they had built impressive fleets to protect their ocean territories from Kreth invasion. The problem was their ships were designed for direct confrontation, massive battleships that formed lines and fired at each other until one side was destroyed. The Kreth had more ships. They always won. Torres spent her first month studying Veloran shipbuilding. She asked endless questions about their technology, their capabilities, their limitations. The engineers thought she was trying to steal their secrets. The admirals thought she was stalling. Then she presented her proposal. You build beautiful battleships, she said to Admiral Kethval. Strong, powerful, magnificent, but you only have 50 of them. The Kreth have 200. We cannot build more quickly, the admiral replied. The resources are limited. Then stop building battleships. Torres projected a design onto the strategic display. Build these instead. The ship she showed was small, fast, and strange. It sat low in the water, almost invisible to sensors. It carried only 2 weapons, but they were new designs based on human submarine technology. torpedoes that could strike a battleship below the waterline where armor was weakest. "This is not honorable combat," one captain objected. "We would be hiding and striking from ambush like cowards." Tors turned to face him directly. "Is it honorable to lose? Is it honorable to let the Kreth destroy your families because you insisted on fighting fairly? Honor is protecting those you love. Everything else is pride." The debate lasted for hours. Some officers refused to consider the idea. Others were intrigued but skeptical. Admiral Kethval listened to every argument before making his decision. "Build 10 of these ships," he ordered. "We will test them in combat. If they work, we will build more." Across Velora, similar conversations were happening. Each human advisor adapted their approach to their specific situation. They did not impose human tactics directly. Instead, they helped the Velorans rediscover their own forgotten strengths and develop new ones. Captain Marcus Webb worked with the urban defense forces of the great cities. Velorans built their cities tall and dense, with massive structures that housed millions. The Kreth strategy was simple: bombard cities from orbit until they surrendered. "You cannot stop orbital bombardment," General Yether told Webb. "We have tried shields, anti-orbital weapons, everything. They simply wait until we exhaust our resources." Webb nodded. "You are right. You cannot stop the bombardment, but you can survive it." He introduced them to the concept of distributed infrastructure. Instead of central power plants and single command centers, they would create redundant systems throughout the city. Underground bunkers connected by tunnels. Mobile command posts that could relocate during attacks. Supply caches hidden in ordinary buildings. "The goal is not to stop them from destroying buildings," Webb explained. "The goal is to make destroying buildings meaningless. They can reduce every structure to rubble, and you will still be fighting from the ruins." The Velorans had never thought about warfare this way. Their culture valued grand structures and permanent monuments. The idea of deliberately planning for destruction was alien to them. "It feels like admitting defeat before we even fight," Yether said. "It is admitting reality," Webb replied. "Defeat is when you stop fighting. As long as you can continue resistance, you have not lost." 6 months into the training program, the Kreth launched their predicted offensive. 3 major fleets attacked simultaneously, targeting the northern reaches, the western seas, and the great cities. It was the largest Kreth operation in 50 years, designed to end the war decisively. The High Council panicked. The new training was incomplete. The experimental ships were not fully tested. The urban defense systems were still being built. They prepared to negotiate surrender terms. Colonel Chen refused. "This is exactly what we trained for," she told the council. "Not perfect conditions, but real ones. Let your warriors show what they have learned." The Battle of the Northern Reaches began at dawn. 50,000 Kreth soldiers advanced up the mountain slopes, supported by air cover and artillery. They expected the Velorans to retreat into their bunkers as usual. Instead, the mountain warriors attacked. They came down from peaks the Kreth thought were unoccupied. They struck convoys carrying supplies and ammunition. They collapsed passages that the Kreth needed for advance routes. When the enemy turned to face one attack, another came from a different direction. General Thexal led from the front, something he had not done in years. He remembered the stories of his ancestors, the warrior kings who had made these mountains run with enemy blood. His soldiers followed him with a fury that surprised even themselves. The Kreth assault stalled within 3 days, then it began to collapse. In the western seas, Admiral Kethval deployed his new torpedo boats for the first time. The Kreth fleet outnumbered his 4-to-1. They expected a traditional engagement, lines of battleships exchanging fire. The Veloran battleships never appeared. Instead, the torpedo boats struck at night when sensors were least effective. They targeted supply ships first, then troop transports, then fuel carriers. They never engaged the Kreth battleships directly. They simply made the fleet starve. When the Kreth admiral finally ordered his battleships to hunt the small attackers, he found himself chasing ghosts. The torpedo boats were too fast, too numerous, too difficult to track. Every time he concentrated his forces, another target was hit somewhere else. After 2 weeks, the Kreth fleet withdrew. They had not lost a single battleship, but they had lost everything that made a fleet operational. The great cities faced the hardest test. The orbital bombardment was devastating, worse than anything the Velorans had experienced. Entire districts were reduced to ash. Millions fled to the underground shelters. But the resistance continued. From the ruins, Veloran soldiers struck at landing parties. They ambushed patrols in the rubble. They used the tunnel networks to appear behind enemy lines, attack, and vanish. Every block the Kreth captured cost them more soldiers than they could afford. Captain Webb coordinated the defense from a mobile command post that relocated every 6 hours. He taught the Velorans to see their destroyed city not as a defeat, but as a weapon. Every collapsed building was potential cover. Every crater was a defensive position. Every pile of rubble was an ambush waiting to happen. After 1 month, the Kreth controlled less than a third of the city. Their casualties were mounting. Their supply lines were constantly attacked. Their soldiers were exhausted and demoralized, fighting an enemy that would not stop. The Kreth High Command ordered withdrawal. For the first time in living memory, the Veloran people had won a major war. The celebrations lasted for weeks. Across Velora, humans and their alien students were treated as heroes. But Chen knew the victory was fragile. The Kreth had retreated, not surrendered. They would learn from their mistakes. They would return with new strategies. She gathered her advisors for a private meeting. "We have won the first round," she told them, "but the war has just begun." The aftermath of the Great Offensive brought changes that even Colonel Chen did not anticipate. Veloran society itself began to shift, influenced by the new ways of thinking that the human advisors had introduced. Kether, now promoted to High General, noticed it first among his soldiers. They questioned orders more frequently. They proposed alternatives to traditional tactics. They debated with their commanders about strategy and logistics. The old military hierarchy, based on strict obedience and rigid rank, was breaking down. "Is this what you intended?" he asked Chen during one of their regular meetings. Chen considered the question carefully. "I intended to teach you how to win battles, but you cannot change how warriors think without changing how they see the world. The Council is concerned. They say we are creating chaos in the ranks. Are your soldiers less effective?" Kether paused. "No, they are more effective than ever, but they are also more difficult to control." Chen smiled. Good soldiers should be difficult to control. They should think for themselves, challenge assumptions, find better solutions. An army of perfect followers will always lose to an army of creative fighters. The changes spread beyond the military. Young Velorans began questioning traditions that had governed their society for centuries. Why did certain families hold power? Why were some professions considered more honorable than others? Why did they fight the Kreth the same way their ancestors had fought, when those methods clearly failed? The High Council blamed the humans. Some counselors called for expelling the advisors and returning to traditional methods. Others argued that the changes, while uncomfortable, had saved their civilization from destruction. The debate ended when the Kreth sent a message. It was not a declaration of war or a demand for surrender. It was a request for negotiation. The Kreth Empire had ruled this region of space for over 1,000 years. They had conquered dozens of species, absorbed countless worlds, built an empire that seemed eternal. They had never negotiated with a species they considered inferior. "What changed?" Counselor Methal asked during the emergency session. "We did," Chen replied. "The Kreth understand strength. For the first time, you have shown them that you are strong enough to be worth talking to. The negotiations took place on a neutral space station, far from both Veloran and Kreth territory. Chen accompanied the Veloran delegation as a military advisor. She had warned them that the Kreth would try to divide them, to offer deals that seemed attractive but would weaken their position. The Kreth negotiator was a massive creature named Vorkal, covered in armored plates that had been decorated with the symbols of 100 conquered worlds. He looked at the Velorans with contempt that was barely concealed. "You have won a single battle," Vorkal said. "This does not change the balance of power. We have 1,000 worlds. You have one. We can afford to lose 10 armies for every one you lose." "Then why are you here?" Chen asked. Vorkal's attention shifted to her. "The human speaks. I had heard that your kind were teaching the Velorans new tricks. You should know that the Kreth have already begun adapting. Your tactics will not surprise us again." "I do not doubt it," Chen replied calmly. "But that is not why you are here. You are here because you realize something that worries you." "And what is that?" "You realize that if we can teach the Velorans, we can teach others. Every species you have conquered is watching this war. If Velora wins, they will wonder if they could win too. You are not afraid of losing to one world. You are afraid of losing to all of them." The chamber fell silent. Vorkal's armored plates shifted in a way that Chen could not interpret. Was it anger, fear, calculation? "The human is clever," Vorkal finally said. "Perhaps too clever, but cleverness does not win wars. Strength wins wars." "We shall see," Chen replied. The negotiations continued for 3 days. The Kreth offered partial autonomy in exchange for tribute payments. The Velorans rejected it. The Kreth threatened to deploy new weapons that could destroy planets. The Velorans pointed out that such weapons would be useless against the guerrilla tactics they had learned. In the end, they reached a temporary truce. No formal peace, but an agreement to stop active fighting while both sides considered their options. It was not a victory, but it was not defeat either. More importantly, it was recognition. The Kreth had acknowledged Velora as a worthy opponent. That acknowledgement would change everything. After returning to Velora, Chen began the next phase of her plan. The truce would not last forever. When the Kreth attacked again, they would be better prepared. The Velorans needed to be better too. But they also needed allies. "The galaxy is full of species that the Kreth have conquered or threatened," Chen explained to the council. "Some of them have been watching your war with great interest. They want to know if there is another way." "You want us to train them as you trained us," Methal said slowly. "I want you to train them even better. You understand now what we taught you, but you also understand your own cultures, your own ways of fighting. You can take what you learned and adapt it for others in ways that we never could." The council debated for days. Many were reluctant to share their new advantages with potential rivals. Others worried about spreading the humans' dangerous ideas to other civilizations. But in the end, they agreed. The first representatives arrived within months. Creatures from a dozen different species, sent by resistance movements and underground networks throughout Kreth space. They came to learn how the Velorans had achieved the impossible. Kether led the training program. He had learned well from Chen, but he brought his own perspective. He understood what it meant to be conquered, to feel helpless against a superior force, to watch your people die in wars you could not win. He knew the despair that these representatives carried with them, because he had carried it himself. "The humans did not teach us how to fight," he told them during the first assembly. "They taught us how to think about fighting. They showed us that our old ways were not working and helped us find new ways. Now I will do the same for you." The training was different for each species. The Torth were aquatic creatures who had never fought on land. Kether worked with them to develop underwater tactics that even the Velorans had not considered. The Methli were small and fragile, easily crushed by Kreth soldiers. He taught them to use their size as an advantage, to infiltrate where larger creatures could not go, to strike at weak points that others could not reach. Each species brought their own strengths and limitations. Each required unique solutions. But the core principles remained the same. Think creatively, adapt quickly, refuse to surrender, fight for your people with everything you have. The Kreth watched these developments with growing alarm. Their intelligence services reported on the alliance forming against them, the training programs spreading through conquered territories, the subtle resistance beginning to stir on worlds that had been quiet for generations. They decided to strike before the threat could grow. The second Kreth offensive began without warning, larger than anything before. They attacked Velora with overwhelming force, determined to crush the uprising at its source. But they also attacked other worlds simultaneously, trying to destroy the alliance before it could form. They were too late. The species that Kether had trained were ready, not fully prepared, not perfectly organized, but ready enough. Across Kreth space, rebellions erupted. Supply lines were cut. Communications were disrupted. Garrison forces found themselves fighting enemies they had dismissed as defeated. On Velora, the battle was desperate. The Kreth had learned from their previous failures. They used new tactics, new weapons, new strategies. They adapted to the guerrilla warfare that had defeated them before. But the Velorans had also evolved. They were no longer simply applying human lessons. They were creating their own innovations, combining ancient traditions with modern thinking, finding solutions that neither humans nor Kreth had imagined. General Thexal held the northern reaches against a force 3 times the size of the previous invasion. His mountain warriors had developed new techniques for fighting in the thin air, using the environment itself as a weapon. They created avalanches that buried enemy positions. They poisoned water supplies without using a single soldier. They made the mountains so hostile that the Kreth could not hold any territory they captured. Admiral Kethval transformed his torpedo boat tactics into something even more dangerous. He coordinated strikes with underwater drones, creating attacks that came from every direction simultaneously. His fleet, still smaller than the Kreth Armada, sank more ships than it lost in every engagement. In the great cities, Captain Webb's urban warfare doctrine had spread to every population center on the planet. The Kreth could take buildings, but they could not hold them. They could advance through streets, but every street was a potential death trap. They could drop soldiers into landing zones, but those soldiers often did not survive long enough to establish positions. The war raged for 3 years. Neither side could achieve decisive victory. Both suffered tremendous losses. The galaxy watched as the eternal Kreth Empire struggled against a coalition of species that should have been easy to crush. Colonel Chen did not see the end of the war. She died in the 2nd year, killed when a Kreth strike hit the command bunker where she was coordinating operations. She was 63 years old. The Velorans mourned her as one of their own. They built a memorial on the moon where she had trained the 1st Regiment, where the impossible victory had begun. Pilgrims came from across the planet to honor the small human who had changed everything. But her work continued. The other human advisors carried on. The Velorans they had trained became teachers themselves. The ideas she had introduced spread further than she could have imagined, transforming not just how species fought, but how they thought about fighting. Kether visited her memorial often. He would stand before the simple stone marker and remember their conversations, her strange human smile, her patient insistence that they could be better than they believed. "We are still learning," he would tell her. "We are still growing. You taught us that we could change. We are changing still." The war ended not with a great battle but with a quiet surrender. The Kreth Empire, stretched thin across too many fronts, facing rebellion on too many worlds, finally acknowledged what they could not defeat. The final treaty was signed on Velora Prime, in the same chamber where the High Council had once debated whether to ask humans for help. The Kreth recognized Veloran independence. They granted autonomy to a dozen other worlds that had joined the resistance. They agreed to reforms that would eventually transform the empire itself. Kether represented the Veloran military at the signing. He thought about how far they had come from those desperate days when defeat seemed inevitable. He thought about Chen and the 12 humans who had arrived in a single small ship, carrying no weapons, offering only knowledge. The Kreth negotiator, a different one than Vorkal who had died in the fighting, asked him a question that would be recorded for history. How did you do it? How did a single world defeat an empire? Kether considered his answer carefully. You taught us that we could not win, he said finally. The humans taught us that we did not have to accept that lesson. The ceremony ended, the treaty was signed, the war was over. But the changes it had begun were just starting. 20 years after the war ended, Kether stood before an assembly unlike any the galaxy had seen. Representatives from 47 species had gathered on Velora Prime, the world that had proven the impossible was possible. They came to formalize something that had grown organically since the war, the alliance of free peoples. Kether was old now, his crystalline scales dulled by age, his movements slower than they had once been. But his mind remained sharp, and his memory remained clear. He remembered every lesson that Chen had taught him. He remembered every soldier who had died fighting for freedom. He remembered the moment when he first understood that thinking differently could change everything. The assembly hall was built on the site of the old training facility, expanded now into a massive complex that served as the heart of the Alliance's military academy. Young warriors from across the galaxy came here to learn, not just tactics and strategy, but the philosophy that had transformed Velora. We gather today to celebrate what we have built, Kether began his address, but we should also remember why we built it. He gestured to a holographic display showing the galaxy. Stars representing free worlds glowed blue. Kreth territory, much reduced but still substantial, showed red. Neutral space appeared gray. The balance of power had shifted dramatically since the war. 30 years ago, the Kreth controlled all of this. The display changed to show the empire at its height. They believed their rule was eternal. They believed that conquered species would remain conquered forever. They believed that strength was the only thing that mattered. The display returned to the present. They were wrong, not because we found greater strength, but because we found a different kind of strength. We learned to think differently. We learned to adapt. We learned that an idea can be more powerful than any weapon. He paused, letting the silence fill the hall. The humans taught us this lesson. 12 individuals from a species that the galaxy barely noticed changed the course of history. They did not do it with armies or technology. They did it with knowledge, patience, and the belief that we could be better than we were. In the audience, a small group of humans sat together. The original advisors who had survived the war were all gone now, their lifespans shorter than Veloran ones. But their children and grandchildren had come to represent Earth at this historic moment. Among them was a young woman named Maria Chen, the granddaughter of the colonel who had started it all. She listened to Kether's speech with tears in her eyes, hearing about a grandmother she had never met but whose legacy she had lived with her entire life. The alliance of free peoples is built on simple principles, Kether continued. Mutual defense against aggression, respect for the independence of member worlds, commitment to the free exchange of ideas. These principles may seem obvious now, but they were revolutionary when we first embraced them. He turned to address the humans directly. Our debt to humanity can never be repaid, but we honor it by passing forward what they gave us. Every species in this alliance has learned from Velora, and Velora learned from Earth. The chain of teaching continues, growing stronger with each link. The treaty establishing the alliance was signed that day. It was more than a military pact. It created frameworks for trade, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, and collective governance. It established academies on multiple worlds where warriors from any member species could learn the methods that had won the war. But more importantly, it enshrined a philosophy. The alliance was built on the belief that no species should be conquered, that resistance was always possible, that freedom was worth fighting for. These ideas spread further than any treaty could enforce, changing how beings across the galaxy thought about themselves and each other. The Kreth Empire, surprisingly, did not oppose the alliance. Their losses in the war had forced them to reconsider fundamental assumptions about their society. Younger Kreth questioned the endless expansion that had defined their culture. Reform movements gained power. Some even began studying the human-influenced methods that had defeated them, adapting them for their own purposes. General Vortek, a Kreth military historian, wrote a book that became famous across the galaxy. He called it The Human Paradox, and it analyzed how a small, young species had changed warfare throughout known space. Humans did not teach strength, he wrote. They taught flexibility. They did not provide answers, they taught questioning. They did not build armies, they built teachers. This was their genius and our downfall. We prepared to fight warriors and they sent philosophers. The book was required reading at the Veloran Academy. Kether made sure of that. He wanted every student to understand how the enemy had perceived them, how the universe had changed because they had been willing to change first. In his final years, Kether devoted himself to preserving the history of the transformation. He recorded his memories, wrote extensive accounts of the training and the battles, collected the writings and speeches of Colonel Chen and the other human advisors. He created what became known as the Chen Archive, a repository of knowledge about human military philosophy and its adaptation to other species. Scholars from across the galaxy came to study it. Military leaders referenced it constantly. It became the foundation for an entirely new field of study, cross-species military adaptation. Maria Chen visited the archive on its dedication day. She walked through halls filled with her grandmother's notes, her recorded lectures, her personal correspondence. She saw the memorial on Velora's moon, now surrounded by a vast complex of training facilities and educational centers. She would not have believed this, Maria said to Kether. She was just a soldier doing her job. Kether's scales shifted in what Maria had learned was a sign of gentle disagreement. She was much more than that. She saw what we could become before we saw it ourselves. That vision changed everything. Maria spent months on Velora, learning about the world her grandmother had helped save. She met veterans who had trained under Chen, listened to their stories, tried to understand the woman who had become a legend. She discovered that Chen had never intended to become legendary. Her letters home, preserved in the archive, were simple and honest. She worried about her students. She missed Earth's food. She wished she could see her family more often. She doubted herself constantly, wondering if she was teaching the right things in the right way. "I am just trying to help them think," Chen had written in one letter. "I do not know if it will be enough. I do not know if anything will be enough, but I have to try. That is all any of us can do." That letter became one of the most famous documents in the archive. It was reproduced on walls throughout the academy, a reminder that even great teachers feel doubt, that courage is not the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it. Kether died peacefully, surrounded by the students and teachers who had become his family. His funeral was attended by representatives from every member of the Alliance, including a delegation from the Kreth Empire that had once tried to conquer his world. They buried him beside Colonel Chen's memorial, united in death as they had been united in the work of transforming the galaxy. The legacy they left behind continued to grow. New species joined the Alliance. New teachers emerged to carry forward the philosophy. New challenges arose and were met with the creative, adaptive thinking that had become the Alliance's greatest strength. 100 years after the war, a young Veloran historian named Zether wrote what became the definitive account of the transformation. She titled it The Teaching, and it examined not just the military changes but the deeper cultural and philosophical shifts that had occurred. The humans gave us more than tactics, she concluded. They gave us permission to change. They showed us that tradition, while valuable, should not become a prison. They taught us that learning is a continuous process, that improvement is always possible, that the way things have always been done is not the only way they can be done. She dedicated the book to all the teachers, human and otherwise, who had made the transformation possible. In the final paragraph, she quoted something that Chen had once told Kether, a simple statement that had become the motto of the Alliance. The greatest victory is not winning a battle, it is teaching others how to win their own battles. Across the galaxy, in academies and training facilities, in military headquarters and civilian schools, that philosophy continued to spread. Species that had once accepted defeat learned to fight. Warriors who had once relied on tradition learned to adapt. Soldiers who had once simply followed orders learned to think for themselves. The humans who had started it all remained a small, relatively insignificant species by galactic standards. Their worlds were few, their technology modest, their military forces minor, but their ideas had changed everything. And those ideas, once released, could never be conquered again. The story of Velora and the human teachers became legend, told to children across 1,000 worlds. It was a story about courage and adaptation, about learning and teaching, about the power of ideas to overcome any force. But most of all, it was a story about hope. Hope that no matter how desperate the situation, change is possible. Hope that no matter how powerful the enemy, resistance can succeed. Hope that a small group of dedicated teachers can transform an entire galaxy. That hope, more than any weapon or tactic, was humanity's greatest gift to the stars.